Well, I'm really excited because, you're going to be on Take 5, and we have shared so much about the path to parenthood. And I think, just going through IVF and having like all these struggles and challenges to get there has been kind of excruciating, but also exciting to share, right?
Yes.
And so many people want to share their stories as well, so we want to invite people to share their stories. But I'm so excited.
It's kind of like a sisterhood / brotherhood that nobody wants to join. But then once you're a part of, like when I first met you, I felt like I knew you because I followed your journey online. And I thought, oh my gosh, she knows what it's like. And not a lot of people do. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, and actually I followed your journey too. So, so it was really cool. And then you reached out to me too. And I was really, just really super touched by that.
Aww.
And I appreciate it so much. I mean, I think that when people do reach out, you feel so loved, because you were like waiting to share that with everybody.
Yes, and you feel like you just have to get it off your chest. I felt like it was a secret, and I wasn't sure how much of the secret to share.
Yeah.
And even coming here today, you guys all came in, and I've never met the three of you before. But we all started talking, and now I feel like I've known you my whole life because we all share this experience in a way.
Yeah. Do we want to go around the room and just kind of introduce ourselves really quickly?
Sure. My name is Annie Kuo, and I am an ambassador for Resolve, the National Infertility Association. I host a monthly support group in Greenwood for people who are struggling to conceive or maintain pregnancy.
I'm Annie Hand, and I used to co-host with Annie before my daughter arrived. And now I have a group that is pregnancy and parenting after infertility in kind of North Seattle area.
So I'll be in your group.
Welcome to join.
Okay.
I'm Leslie Chapman, and I run or facilitate the Snohomish County Support Group, which is based out of Everett right now.
And I'm Jake Chapman. I'm the husband of Leslie, and I'm here to support the effort and be a part of the conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having us today.
Yeah. Thank you. And we promise we won't talk about your vagina, so we'll tell you about that. That was my brother's request.
Except for that one mention. That's all we have.
I'm sorry, I just had to get that in, just in case.
I love that you started with that. That's perfect.
Oh my gosh. So I'm just curious, how long did it take you to get to where you are? For us, it took 9 years.
9 years.
I mean, granted, I feel like we weren't actively on that path. Like sometimes you would take a break or we were getting ready to move. But ultimately, I remember when we got engaged and like a month before we got married, we stopped using, anything. And so I was like, it's going to happen this year. And we're like, we're not.
Yes, we were 6 years and did the same thing. Like we were ready to, get a surprise pregnancy the first month we tried, and oh darn, now we've got to hurry up and get ready. And then 6 years went by and we still didn't have a baby. Yeah. What about you guys?
Well, my story is a little bit backwards in that my experience of fertility treatment came after I had a child, but I did have a primary infertility diagnosis, both male and female factor, before she was conceived. And we got that diagnosis over a year of trying after a miscarriage that happened at 12, sorry, I'm thinking 12. It was actually 12/24, Christmas Eve, 2009, at 14 weeks. So just at that time when you think you're safe, I lost the pregnancy. Nothing happened for a while, and so went and got checked out. My daughter was conceived narrowly, spontaneously before beginning IVF, but because I knew we would have a narrow window to perhaps have another child, I pursued fertility preservation after she turned 2, which were unsuccessful attempts. So I have made peace with having an only child, but in the meantime have been able to relate to the community around infertility because I would have been so devastated to not have a community or people to provide mutual support. And so for that reason, I've learned a lot about empathy and being there for one another and not being alone, but seeking resources and support. So I have the experience of pursuing fertility treatment 8 times, pursued 8 cycles, because I'm very stubborn and didn't want to give up. But in the meantime, have found resolution as a family of of 2.
Well, I had some health issues, so I had to go straight to IVF, but it took us from starting fertility treatments 4.5 years before my daughter was born, and she's almost 15 months. But I had 7 losses before we moved on from IVF to surrogacy, and our daughter was born the first try with our carrier in Oregon, and we had a great experience. We're really lucky, and we have, you know, 1 more embryo frozen. But yeah, I never took breaks. I remember like the doctor saying, "Do you want to take a break?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What do we do next? What do we do?" I needed that, you know, plan of what we do next. And I went through 2 retrievals, but lots of other procedures and surgeries, and so.
Yeah. No one really prepares you for the procedures that you have to do to get to the big procedure, right?
Yes.
I mean,
the medications,
Yeah.
and the shots.
I was like counting once, and it was like, I think it was like over 80 weeks of shots. And sometimes I was up to 4 a day. So.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's brutal.
It's worth it though.
Yeah.
I got the little one now.
So we met in 2009. We got married or 2007. And I knew right away that we were going to have some challenges. Jake was married previously, had a 4-year-old daughter. They had a difficult pregnancy, so they actually had a doctor recommend that they not have any more children. That may not be a good idea. So he had a vasectomy. So here I am, 27. I meet this really awesome guy, and I'm like, great, I can't have any children with you. So it was part of the conversation early on that something was going to have to happen. So after we got married, we did the surgery to have his vasectomy reversed, and tried and tried and tried, and just something didn't feel right. It just wasn't happening. So we went to see just a general practitioner who agreed that something should have happened by now. So they, you know, do what most general practitioners do. They start with the non-invasive stuff. Here's some Clomid, or here's some, you know, here's a thermometer, you know, take your temperature, and all the crazy stuff you read on the internet you should try before you know, go to see a fertility doctor. So we did all of that stuff, and eventually went to see a fertility doctor and had everything tested over again. We actually went to 3 clinics. And we're continued to say, everything looks great. You know, surgery was successful, everything should work. And so we're what you would consider unexplained infertility. Nobody could give us an answer, right? It's almost more frustrating. Just give me a cause so I can fix it. We're both kind of fixers, and we just couldn't fix it. So it was recommended after several IUIs and lots of other less invasive treatments that we try IVF. We were very blessed that it worked for us on our first try. So we have a 6-year-old little boy, and after he was born, about a 1.5 years into it, started trying to give him a sibling. You don't get cured from infertility. It still exists whether you have a baby or not. So for us, we decided to use one of the embryos from our first procedure to have another child, and luckily for us it worked. So I have a 2-year-old little boy. And thought that that was the end of the road. And when he was about 8 months old, we both turned 38 and got a little surprise. So we have a 5-month-old little girl who was conceived completely naturally, and is kind of a miracle. So when our second son was about 4 months old, I started the support group in Snohomish County, because I started going back to the support group that I was in before, when we tried to have our second child, and you just sometimes don't fit in the community anymore. I think it's kind of almost more isolating after you have a child, because you don't quite fit in with the group of, you know, TTC trying to conceive women that you were so close to before. But then you don't really fit with mothers who just, you know, spontaneously got pregnant either. So you have to kind of reach out to other parents who've gone through this, because nobody understands the highs and the lows and the emotions and the money and the just blind faith you have to have going into it, that, you know, this is going to work. So
that's really fascinating. Kind of reminds me of something that Kaci said too, just like after the baby comes, that you still kind of have, I don't know, like challenges, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like it's a, for me, not being able to get pregnant was the first time in my life that I failed at something. And I'm sure I failed at lots of stuff before. I was so perfect. But it was the first time I was failing at something that I was doing everything right for. Like I was following the rules and I was reading everything and I was going to all the doctors. And then I really had to buckle down for 6 years, and I felt like I adopted this whole new identity, which was me feeling like a failure. Like the one thing that I'm supposed to be able to do just like everyone else, and I couldn't do it. And now that I have Scarlett, I still feel like that person.
Really?
Which is crazy. And now that she's almost a year, I'm finally starting to identify as a parent. But like you said, Leslie, it never goes away. Like I'm still infertile. And if we want to expand our family, it's not as easy as, like, now the question is always, when are you going to have a second? And it's like, well, it's not that easy. We don't get to go have a bottle of wine and 9 months later have a kid. You know, it's tough.
Right.
Well, I mean, what kept all of you, I'm curious for you too, Michelle, what kept everybody going? I mean, 9 years is a long time.
Well, for us, it was like we have to, you know, like poop or get off the pot. Like we just, I was, I just, you know, celebrated my 39th birthday. So it was like, you know, how many more years do I have? Like we have to give this like our 100%. And my husband's 43. So it's just like we were determined to give this one try, you know, or one last try, I guess. But
well, there's a grieving process that you go through. You know,
sure,
I want to be pregnant. I want to have a child that's my husband and that's mine. And through the process, if you find that that's just not a possibility, you can't just move to the next thing. Like some people want you to do, oh, you should just adopt. Oh, why don't you do this? Well, you know, I have to be okay with this no longer being my dream and, you know, altering it to this is what we're going to do next.
I think it's so unfair to the adoption process for people to say that, as though adoption is only a fix for infertility. It doesn't fix anything, and I know you know this better than anyone. It is its own amazing, difficult process.
Well, yeah, because I'm adopted, and I am like pro-adoption, but I think that for me, I really wanted a biological connection to someone in my family. You know, like I have met my biological family. I love them. They're great people. They're you know, it's like one big happy family, but there's something different about living with someone who's connected with you. You know, like my sister lives in Seattle, but we didn't grow up together. So it's just like I really wanted that, but I was afraid to want it too much in case this didn't work out either. And adoption's not off the table for us. It's just we wanted to give this a go first. And adoption actually is crazy expensive too. So if you, like we looked at Korea just because I'm adopted through Korea, and I mean we were talking like $50,000
at least.
Yeah, it's very expensive. Some people will suggest adoption because they're just trying to help us solve a problem, but a lot of times when we are sitting with someone, we just want them to sit with us and listen and be present in the moment so that we can process our grief. And to us, sometimes the quick, you know, suggestion of adoption can feel dismissive because it's dismissing where we are right now in our grief to get through the pain of perhaps not carrying a pregnancy, which some women want to carry a pregnancy and bond with their child through the womb and give birth. You know, that's sort of a life experience.
I don't know if any of you.
I got news for you.
I'm really scared.
There's no way out but.
There's no way out but through.
You forget. That's why they say why you can have multiple children is you forget all about the pain and.
Well, I felt like sometimes people would make me kind of, when they do the adoption route, try to make you feel like guilty. Like there's so many kids out there that need a home. Like I shouldn't be trying so hard to have my own biological connection. And it's like, you can't judge someone unless you've been there. And even if you've been there, everyone's story is different.
Yeah, I think it's easy for those people to say that. You know,
and they think that maybe you just go up to an adoption mart and I'll take that one, sign me up.
You know, if it were that easy, I would have done it 6 years ago.
You know, and
bargain prices.
It's not like that, but it sounds like they're like, but there's all those kids that are just waiting. But even in foster care, just getting all of the background checks, going through all that process to be able to be a foster parent. It's still not
and
easy.
that's still difficult too, because I worked with like some foster care systems in other states, and sometimes that's difficult too, you know, because the biological parents will come back into the picture. So I just don't think people should judge on that stuff, you know. It's really
Yeah, adoption
personal.
is a beautiful option for some, for some families, that process their infertility, even though adoption does not solve infertility. I have a friend I've advocated with in Washington, D.C. for family building legislation, and she is an adoptive parent. But every National Infertility Awareness Week, she reminds people that even though she adopted and found resolution to building her family that way, she's still infertile.
Right. And even, when you adopt, there's like a triangle of grief, because the birth parents, they lose something, the child loses something, and then the adoptive parents, they're usually grieving through something, so it's not easy too. And I have a lot of Korean adoptee friends who, there's a push now to like not be pro-adoption, so I mean,
really?
Just because it's like a lot of like for instance, a lot of my Korean friends, they feel like they were stripped of their culture and and a lot of things, and so there is a movement now to say no to adoption as well. So it's just it's complicated. Everything is complicated, But Jake, I was kind of wondering, and maybe you can chime in, how you dealt with grief and infertility. Just because I think about my husband too.
Yeah. So for us, it was as Leslie mentioned, it was really like we're kind of fixers, right? So I think from the male perspective, we try to overcompensate by trying to fix the situation and be there for support. A lot of times you don't know how to support. So that for our story, that was a lot of what took place. I mean, you mentioned it, the shots and the difficulty in going through that. It's a real test on the relationship. So it's a process, right? It's difficult to not have to struggle with infertility, but then it's also impact on a relationship as well. So it's like a double whammy, right? So it's really challenging, but it's also, when you have some success, it doesn't go without the risk part, right? So you look back and you're like, wow, we went through a really tough time, but we overcame. So you can kind of spin that into a positive light as well too. So I know that there were a lot of people around us, like I think your cousins, they had twins, but how many times did they try?
They tried for 12 years. Well, my cousin was biologically my cousin. He was born with a genetic disorder that skips generations. I think it was called azoospermia, where the sperm just doesn't move, and they didn't know it until they got married and started trying. And so once they found that out, she had to grieve that process of, there's no way that I can have a child that biologically is both of ours. So they tried lots of different methods, and they're in the military. And so, they're moving around, and there's only so much that the insurance will cover. And, ultimately they ended up, and she kept going. This is what I want. And she kept going, and now they have boy and girl twins that are 2 years old. So, and everybody in our family just didn't understand. It was, why? Why can't you just be happy being together? And no one knows, what your ultimate desires are. Everybody has that dream. And it's like we were talking about, you deliver and you have this baby, and it's your dream come true. But you've been on this roller coaster of highs and lows and success and failure that it's so hard to emotionally get off. So you just keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. So you have this child that you've finally, achieved your dream, and you're like, okay, now what do I do?
I literally kept waiting for somebody to take her away from me.
Yes, exactly.
And that's so hard to explain to people. If I had $1 for every time somebody came up to me and said, aren't you just so over the moon in those first few months? And I was just like, I don't even know what's happening right now. I haven't even accepted that I have a baby. It's a completely different, and Jake, you were talking about the impact it has on relationships. That's something that I tried to ignore in a really bad way. And my husband was the one that was like, because we've talked about, would we ever try for another kid? And he's like, do you realize how that's impacted our relationship with each other as a husband and wife over the last 6 years?
How did it impact it? Was it
everything was about,
or was it a positive?
It was a positive in that we were forced to learn that we each communicate differently about things. We were forced to learn that we each grieve differently. And that made us a better couple. but it also was our entire world. We had to plan trips around a transfer. If I was doing progesterone shots, I remember one time my girlfriends had a fun slumber party. We're adults, I don't know why we did this, but it was, and John got up and came over at 5 a.m. to give me my progesterone shots. It's things like that. It's being out at a bar and being like, oh no, I gotta go, bathroom stall of pesos. I gave myself a Lupron shot in the stomach. You know, it just, it affects everything. And by the way, even if you stop trying, every month you either find out you're pregnant or you're not. Because we took a year off. Even though I don't really ovulate, every month I was like, maybe this month.
So it's like repeat PTSD, right? Getting your period is like,
over again.
Right? And then multiply that by as many years as people are trying on this journey.
And that's all you talk about as a couple.
Yeah, and I think the intimacy too became work, which was a struggle. I mean, I remember there were times when on a lunch break, it was like, you know, I lived close by. She's like, you need to come home now, and I know what that meant, right? And I was like, well, you know, and over time, at first, it was like, oh, this is pretty cool, right? But then it just it became an effort after a while, and it just kind of like, you know, and then every month when it didn't happen, or every week, it was after the shots and everything. So I was like, okay, I gotta pick the pieces up again and go forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. When you say every month, it is like PTSD because you get your period or something and you're like, oh, it sucks, you know.
So then it crashes, very rapidly every month.
Or like the holidays, we talked about that before. The holidays were difficult for me. I don't know about Jim, but you know, because and I've said this before, and it's not to anyone's fault. Like, we always got presents for the kids, but like no one would get us presents, which I don't need presents, but I always felt like, does anyone realize that we're trying, you know? So there's stuff like that.
The holidays can be a very difficult time. You know, we're about to hit this hard season for the infertility community. Whether or not people are actually attending support groups, anyone who identifies as such knows the onslaught of, you know, the questions from well-meaning family and friends who are asking, so when's little Johnny gonna finally appear? And there's a lot of family-oriented activity around the holidays. Everything's about like Jesus and the Nativity and, you know, Thanksgiving.
And Santa and the kids. And
the place, maybe the nursery that the room that you've hoped to show off at Thanksgiving as a nursery, or that corner that's still empty at the dining table, you know, that you hope to have a child there year after year. And it's that with the passage of time around the holidays, you know, we always reflect and think back about the past year. You know, it's another reminder of something that hasn't yet been fulfilled.
And you have to develop your coping mechanisms, you know. It's like you either use avoidance and you just don't go to the parties, or you use humor, you know. I remember we were talking once and my mom walked in the room around Christmas time and she said, what are you guys talking about? I said sex, and she just looked at me and I said, I don't think we're doing it right. And it was just, you know, she kind of rolled her eyes, but it's like, you know, people ask, and what we ended up with is, you know, when people ask, well, when do you guys have? Well, we're trying. And you just kind of leave it at that. And sometimes people know, but until you start talking about it, because there's such this stigma of sometimes shame or embarrassment around it, that until you start really opening up the conversation, then you realize that there are a lot of people that are touched by this or struggle with this and just don't talk about it because, you know, there's blame sometimes involved. When you go to the doctor, sometimes you find out it's his fault, it's her fault. Sometimes you don't find out anybody's fault, which I think was almost nice, because then there was, you know, nothing to go after. But when you have that, then that gets into your relationship too. So, you know.
We often talk about how when there is a factor identified, whether male or female or shared, that the couple should just approach it as a team, because, you know, this is an eventual goal for the whole family, and rather than shift or look for blame or responsibility, just say, you know, this is our problem, you know, this is our problem.
Well, because I joke, because it's definitely me. But I knew before I met my husband. No, but I'm saying I knew before we started dating, so I was able to be upfront. Hey, if we're talking about a future and I do want kids, I know that it's going to be, I have to do IVF. And so at least he went in knowing what was, you know, what he was in for. And so it wasn't like we were this couple and he had anticipated this is how we're gonna have a family like everyone else, just, you know, quick try and here we go. So at least he knew, and we didn't have that added stress of the blame later. It was kind of, we had that acceptance of, well, if we're gonna do it, this is how we have to do it. So
I love the love stories on the couch here, because you knew before you married Jake that he'd had a vasectomy and it'd have to be reversed, and there'd be that question over, you know, what would happen. And then Stu knew about you, and still they kept saying yes, yes, yes to each other, and have gotten through some hard times. So I can only think that it just reinforces the commitment, even though, you know, it does redefine the nature of your relationship for a season.
I think we're better off now than ever before, but I also think we're lucky, because I can see how this process can break people, both people and couples. It's a lot, and you know, it's interesting. It's sometimes hard to have, I don't know, like, I always looked at everyone else, you included, people who were working in TV, and I was jealous of everybody, because I'm like, oh, they're probably gonna have kids in 5 years and it'll be so easy. And then when you came out with your story, I was so surprised.
Oh, really?
Yes. Not surprised that you came out with it, but surprised because I thought somebody else has been going through this and not talking about it. Like, you were still going on the air every day with a smile and doing your work, and I felt such compassion for you, because I know what that feels like. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, it is hard. Well, because, you know, I'm super emotional, obviously, right now anyway. But yeah, it is hard to, I think, just to have that in the back of your mind, and like, why hasn't this happened yet? And I still want to, you know, you still have like these obligations and career goals and all that stuff. So yeah,
you still have to go through your life, but it's hard to ignore what's really going on.
You were saying that, like, a lot of people you don't know. For me, it's kind of like, well, we're expecting, I'm not pregnant. I kind of had that Band-Aid ripped off for me, and it actually felt really good, because people close to me, you know, knew what was going on, but it was kind of like, well, everyone else, we're expecting, and I'm not going to get it, you know, my body's not going to change, so this is what's going on. And I was able to finally be more open to people that were outside our, you know, circle of infertility or close family. You know, it's like before on social media, I maybe wouldn't say anything, and now it's like I share stories that people are doing, or I post about things, because I hope that my story might help other people that are going through similar things and feel like it's something to be shameful about, or it's something you don't talk about. You know, so, but yeah, it was kind of, I was able to finally be like, well, I'm not going to be able to hide this anymore. And you know, I remember I was saying that we had to do like a psych evaluation, and they're like, well, would you tell any children that you have through surrogacy? And I'm like, of course. There's not going to be any, you know, maternity shots of me in the house. You know, my child might ask, where are the pictures of me in your belly? And so it's being open, and even though I didn't get to decide that for myself, it's kind of a relief.
If it's any consolation, I don't have any maternity photos either.
I don't want any.
Well, you kind of get put in this new category, you know, you don't really associate, or you don't really feel comfortable kind of celebrating to your friends that maybe are still struggling, but then you've got these other friends that maybe have children already. And I know I parent our children a little bit differently in my mind. I mean, we've invested so much time and money and emotion and just blind faith in this process that once the baby is finally there, people give you the, you know, advice, you know, don't rock them to sleep because they won't be able to do it on their own, and, you know, don't hold them too much. And I'm like, you know how hard I worked for this kid? I am gonna hold him every second of every day. You know, he's 6 and we walk through the grocery store, and if he walks around the corner and I can't see him, I start to have anxiety. I mean, and there's not always, especially a guarantee that I can do this again. You know, in our situation, we're very lucky and that we were able to have more children, but that could have been my only chance. So I went all out. Maternity pictures, you know, smash cake pictures, you know, I bought all the stuff I wanted to buy, and I spent so much time with him because I wanted to enjoy every moment. And I still feel that way. And you still feel like somebody could take it away at any moment. And he's 6. So, you know, I mean, I feel like I parent a little bit differently in that sense.
I wish I'd done the maternity photos now, just because it does look like that was my only pregnancy. But and Kaci and I were talking before the camera started rolling about how we lost our innocence through miscarriage, the experience of miscarriage before our eventually successful pregnancies and being able to have our children. But if I could take it back, I would have been more present and would have let myself exhale a little bit more into my pregnancy. It was just that I did have a little bit of PTSD and wondering when that shoe was going to drop and expecting bad news. It was only until literally I was like, there's no denying, like this is happening, you know, that then I had to do some like very, very quick nesting at like the 11th hour that this baby is really coming.
Yeah, we're 9 months pregnant and they're like, okay, I think it's a time to set up the nursery.
Yeah.
I was the opposite. I was setting things up. I had nothing else to do. I wasn't going to doctor's appointments. And I remember, you know, my parents who've been so supportive, my mom was very, very cautious. She didn't buy anything for the baby until we had our 20 weeks and everything. The scans looked good. And then she sent me a box of girl clothes. So, it's, and like you're saying, I think parenting, I thought that I would be this like helicopter mom, because this might be my only one, I don't know. And I feel like I let my daughter fall down. I let her take those risks. She's one of those risky toddlers. You know, you're like, don't climb that. And she's like, really? I can, look at me.
And she makes eye contact while she's
Yes, yes. She loves slides. She's got bumps and bruises. You know, and also my husband and I are very big on raising her with manners. Already at 15 months, she says please. We expect please. And so, you know, we say please. We say goodbye when we leave daycare. If she doesn't look at her teacher, I turn her around and we wave goodbye. And, you know, I'll take the time and there. It's like I didn't do all the investment of time and money and all these things to not put the effort into raising a nice little human being. You know, when she's nice, we praise her. That was so kind of you, because we want her to be this nice little person. I'm not going to let her be, you know, my little special snowflake and get away with things. I'm probably more hard. I think my mom and other people, when I'm like, use your words, they're like, she's 15 months old. I'm like, but she has those words. I've heard her use them. You know, and I think I'm a little bit harder on her for the struggles I went through, because I'm like, if this is my only, I'm not, you know, going to raise a rude little kid. Or a kid that's afraid of everything. I was a fearful child, and I'm glad that she's willing to try a new slide or do something and ask for help if something, you know, up, help, you know, if she wants to get on the climber and stuff. So,
yeah.
You know.
I do think that whole mentality of we feel so fortunate that we have our children finally with us sticks with us, and it does influence the way that we parent. I know that I am like, I have that I don't want to miss out syndrome, you know? So it's like, okay, I'm going to be a Girl Scout Daisy leader. Okay, I'm going to read all the books on pediatric brain science, you know, so, you know, the one shot that I have, I'm going to do it right, you know? And at one point, I was literally putting into practice that suggestion that you talk to your children so much between birth and 3, because that's like the time more than any other in their lives that those neural connections are firing. That she gave me feedback one day and she's like, Mommy, why do you keep talking and never stop? You know? And it was just that I was like, okay, I have one shot to like do this right. And so I think that for that reason, it's made me a little bit more compulsive of a parent, you know, to like try to read up on the latest research and apply it, because this may be the only time that I get to do it. So, you know, maybe relaxing is in order too.
Yeah, I get that, like if it's your only chance, you know, and you didn't know the first one, and you're like, I want to do everything, like, you know, we were like, first birthday party, okay, Santa pictures, so, like, I'm not crazy about, but there are certain things, and I want to make sure that we do. We took her to the pumpkin patch last weekend. She was, okay, pumpkins, you know, it was more for us.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, she loves pumpkins, but that's definitely for us. Or, you know, we take her to the zoo. She can't see. We're like, look, it's a giraffe way back there. Don't you see it?
Yeah.
You know, and it's more for us and the family things. But then when you say we did that, we took you and did these things when we were little and spent that time as a family. So I get the not missing out, and I probably will end up volunteering. Oh, I'll go on every field trip, you know, that type of thing, and not wanting to miss out. And I have good memories of my parents being involved with, you know, field trips and things like that, Indian princesses, you know, things like that.
Yeah. Or like taking out Parent Met magazine or Seattle's Child and like with the highlighter and making sure that you have like all the weekend's activities, you know, and planning ahead. But yeah, I think in that way, that's sort of, that's one way that that whole experience of infertility has affected the now, even though it's like nearly 7 years later.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time, so I just have like two more questions, unless anyone wants to chime in. But I'm just wondering if anyone watches this, if you could give them any advice or lasting impressions or thoughts, you know, if they're struggling or if they're starting that journey or whatever. And then also, is there anything that we as a state need to do? You know, because I'm really big on the insurance part. I really feel like, you know, insurance should have covered our struggle, you know, because if it's a disease, if infertility is a disease, which it is, then why can't we get insurance? Because we've paid off this kid for a long time. We won't even own him outright, you know?
How much does that kid walking around cost, you know? $150K?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Protect your investment.
We were lucky in because that was when they told us that was our next step. We left, I was so defeated. We left the doctor's office. I was like, there's no way I can ever afford this. And we were very blessed. My dad actually won the lottery several years ago.
What?
And that was how we paid for it. There was the only way. That
Like
we were
the
able to,
lottery?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was also a struggle too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
accepting the money,
Yeah.
you know, was very difficult.
Sure,
So,
sure.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
Yeah.
cool story though when you
Yeah.
say that, but
I went to
understand.
the fertility walk last year, and I made shirts for my kids that says "My grandpa won the lottery, so I could have a heartbeat." So, like, it's a you know, it's cool for them to grow up knowing that. And you know, my mom is like, you know, if there's one really awesome way that we could spend this money, you know, we don't need to take fancy vacations or do things like to have a grandchild. And they got 2 out of it because we were able to have enough embryos from the first procedure to have our second child. And so I went into the second, it's exactly the same process, almost, minus the retrieval. And when we went into the second one, it was all those feelings again. And so I used the same mantra I did for the first, which was just surrendering to the process. You know, once you accept that this is what I'm going to do via IVF or IUIs or even adoption, there's only so much that you can control. I could control when I took my shots, when I went to the doctor, doing what they told me to do, taking care of myself in general. But you can't control the outcome. So just accepting the process and finding a really good support team, a doctor you love. We love our doctor that we used. I did some yoga for fertility classes, which are wonderful for stress relief, and going to the support groups. You know, finding outlets to help you manage your stress level and your anxiety level, because that's really the killer to the process. So,
Yeah, I think bringing awareness to this is very helpful. It helps people understand the struggle, the empathy factor, right? Because you can't just say you don't understand, you haven't been through this to family members, right? And then I think the other thing that you could do is set yourself up with a counselor just for protected talk time. Just talk about your feelings.
I'd say I wish I had a support group years ago. I started going to the Resolve group right before we transferred to our surrogate, and I wish I had that. And I had friends and family that had gone through IVF, but they had been successful at that point, which was great for them, but I needed something else. And so I'd say if you're struggling, find a community. There's people that you can just text, be like, I'm struggling today, and can we go get coffee? Or, you know, going out and being active. You've done a lot of things with groups of getting out there and, you know, finding things to do with people that just get it. You don't even have to like talk about it if you don't want to, but just being with people that get it. If you say, I don't want to talk today, or I really do need to talk today, just having that.
Yeah. The fortunate news for Washington State is we do have an active and growing community through Resolve. Also, those who are experiencing pregnancy loss or infant loss can find support through PS Puget Sound, which is Parent Support Puget Sound. And these are groups that have over 15 support groups meeting around the area. They're all free. There is a community of support that you can also find online. You know, in-person support groups aren't for everyone, but Resolve has a support platform called on inspire.com. There's a Finding Resolution group there where people can anonymously, you just pick a screen name, you know, can log in. I actually, before starting the support group in Greenwood, was active on an online discussion board.
That's how I found Resolve, was through Inspire.
Yeah.
That was recommended by my fertility doctors.
Great. Yeah, the doctors are starting to refer patients to either these support groups or to other counselors, which sometimes is a great supplement to a support group, whether online or in person, because then you can really have someone who's trained to help process your grief and maybe even help with couple issues. Resolve is also active in helping build family building legislation. So to answer your question about what can we here do in Washington State to help enact change in the legislature, one is to rally behind family building legislation to encourage our lawmakers to sign into law a state mandate insurance. A state mandate for health insurance that covers infertility treatment. And this is a charge that's been done and is continuing both in Washington, D.C., and we're hoping to have people write letters to lawmakers in Olympia. But every May, close to the middle of the month, there is a letter that's posted on resolve.org that people can go and literally just sign. It takes 2 seconds, well, 2 minutes maybe, to sign. And we literally print those out and deliver them at our meetings to the lawmakers in D.C. Oh, wow. Cory Booker and a senator in Connecticut are behind this legislation on the national level, and we hope to rally some lawmakers in Olympia to get Washington State up to par with 15 other states that have already passed the state mandate. So I encourage people to get connected to resolve.org, even if it's remotely, just by going online. And then, you know, checking out if you need some support, especially through this holiday season, coming to one of our support groups or finding inspire.com and connecting to people there who may perhaps have your similar diagnosis. There's a lot of support now growing within the community around the Footsteps for Fertility 5K that comes to town every April and gives out, you know, at least half a dozen grants for IVF.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And even covers medications. And we also are planning film screenings. There's a November 18th Pregnant-ish event that's coming to town to offer a meditation and a panel around fertility. So every now and then there are special events that occur, and I think people can get connected by either connecting to one of our support groups just to say, hey, I want to be on your mailing list, or some of the other patient support groups online. There's one that SRM, Seattle Reproductive Medicine, hosts. You don't have to be a patient to be there, but it's called Hope and Support. It's a closed group, so you can maintain some privacy while you get connected on Facebook.
And by the way, these are much more positive ways to use an online presence than Googling your symptoms, followed by chances of getting pregnant, which was always a negative for me. But these are very positive ways that you can actually connect with people and actually feel a sense of hope.
Yeah, and even if, you know, getting to a group or going online isn't your thing, because I recognize that everybody's got their own cup of tea, find somebody that you can talk to. And it may take a few tries or, you know, a few different channels to find that person, but, you know, I've been surprised by the people that have supported me, and also surprised the opposite way. Yes. You know, people who haven't been supportive, you know, but you just keep trying. I remember after my miscarriage, some of the best support I ever got were from men. You know, who would have thunk? I don't know if it was, you know, reverence for the female vessel or something, but they really, you know, acknowledged the loss and the pain that I might be feeling, and just said the right things at the right time. And there's somebody in our lives who can be there for us in that way. Just keep trying, you know. And it might change some of our friendships or relationships for a season, but eventually those bonds can come back. It's just a process while we're going through the journey that we just need to get through, but don't give up.
I feel like so overwhelmed. I'm so like close, you know, so I just like listening to all of you and seeing that you all have children, and I can't wait for this one.
You're going to be a great mom.
He's
know
a
about
very
that.
lucky baby. I'm going to have so much fun with you guys.
Gosh, I'm so scared, but
No.
thank you so much for the conversation and for coming over, and I really do think that this will help a lot of people, just because, you know, every time we do a story on infertility, people write us in and they say thank you for addressing this, and I do feel like we have to change you know, how we talk, and also change how it's perceived in the community. And thank you for like sharing everything and coming on board. So it's
I'm so happy for you.
well,
You're gonna do great.
I'm like, I am like so overwhelmed, but
Yes.
but I'm excited.
It's okay.
Okay.
I keep thinking like Michelle needs to have her own reality TV show for being a new parent.
no.
Like, wouldn't you guys watch
We
this?
can just put some cameras up before we leave. Is that right?
Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
guys.
Thank you for using your platforms to help raise awareness about this, because I do feel like here in Washington State we're talking about this more. Yeah, and that itself shatters the stigma and any shame.
Yeah. And more people, we're seeing those numbers. You know, more and more people need to have the help. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. We're done.